Welcome back. On Wednesday, March 21, African leaders gathered at an extraordinary summit of the African Union in Kigali, Rwanda, to sign an agreement which established the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCTA. The decision to establish the free trade area, which is poised to be the world's largest free trade area in terms of participating members since the creation of the World Trade Organization, stems from the 18th Ordinary Session of the AU in 2012, where member nations agreed to establish the free trade area by 2017. However, Nigeria and 9 other countries refused to sign this agreement. Interestingly, Nigeria was absent at that meeting. Investment analysts at AfriInvest Securities in their report looked at various perspectives to this and highlighted the pains and the gains. I'm being joined by one of the analysts at AfriInvest, Valiance Moweta. Hello, Valiance. Good to have you on the show.
Good to be here.
All right, looking at the agreement signed in Kigali, give us a general background of this and what does this mean for business and trade in Africa?
Okay, so in 1991, the Abuja Treaty was signed, and it was signed to create the African Economic Community, and they were to do this in 6 stages over a 34-year period. So by 2012, like you said earlier, there was a meeting of African leaders, and they decided to create a free trade area by 2017. However, there was an extension, and by March 2018, it was signed into agreement. What this means for the African continent per se is it was done to boost intra-African trade. Intra-African trade is one of the lowest in the world. That's trade between countries on the African continent is one of the lowest in the world at about 16%, compared to regions in Asia which are at about 51%, and then Europe, which goes as high as 60–70% of trade within the continent. Africa is still at about 16%, while also contributing a little over 3% to the total trade volumes in the world. So this was actually done to boost trade within regions on the African continent, and as such, integrate businesses and also grow the African economy as a whole.
Now, looking at the whole scenario, would you say that the continent has actually put out some strategic plan, has enacted some strategic plan towards achieving this?
Yes, they have. So the initial plan, or it still is the plan, is to do this in 6 stages, like I said earlier, over a 34-year period. So the first stage was actually to integrate the existing RECs. RECs stand for Regional Economic Communities. So you have your ECOWAS, you have your EAC, the South African Development Community. So these are economic powerhouses made up by neighboring countries in different regions of the continent. And the first stage is actually to integrate them. So, okay, you have your ECOWAS and you have your South African Development Community. I'm using these as examples. How do you merge the both of them together? So, although we are not very close to each other, we have some form of trade agreement between our members. After that, the next stage was actually to normalize the tariffs. So, you're importing a product from, let's say, Europe into an ECOWAS nation. Is it going to be cheaper or more expensive to do that as opposed to importing it into an East African country? So the second stage was actually to normalize tariffs within these different regional economic communities. And then they move forward again to now saying, oh, how can we reduce or totally eliminate tariffs on African products? So you have made in Africa products that are going to find their way within different countries. So then they moved to actually, there's going to be a move to actually remove tariffs on some or all of these products. And then you move forward to actually setting up institutions which are actually going to be in charge of intra-African trade as a whole. So those are the strategies that they have put in place to actually ensure that this actually is realized.
Now, as an investment analyst, were you surprised that Nigeria pulled out at the time it did?
Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense, in the respect that because of the fact that Nigeria was basically spearheading negotiations up until the last minute, our chief trade negotiator chaired the negotiating forum. Our Minister of Trade and Investments actually chaired the African Minister of Trade's conference too. So it was surprising because Nigeria had been in the forefront of negotiations, but then last minute we decided to pull back from the agreement. But however, and then on a no, because there have been concerns that have been raised about the effects, the short and long-term effects this is actually going to have on the Nigerian economy. So I think it took them to the last minute to actually decide or realize that we actually need to go back and consult more stakeholders to determine the best way for Nigeria in this deal.
Well, aside from consultation that perhaps a lot of people argued that we're not there, the issue of competition was also raised. And some people were like, Nigeria is not competitive. Okay, for instance, you have Rwanda, for instance, has its own airline, Air Rwanda. You have South Africa with its South African airline, but Nigeria, we don't even have our own airline. So if South Africa would have to bring in their products, the apple, into Nigeria in their own airline, what about Nigeria? Are you going to transport your banana, for instance, to these countries in their own airline?
True. Here is the thing. So the issue of competition, although if left unchecked, competition could actually be detrimental to local manufacturing. But then again, it's all a good thing because it gets to spur businesses to actually want to up their game, if I should say. So now you know that you're no longer dealing with a local market. Companies are going to be forced to actually now they would have to start specializing. Competition is actually going to lead to increased specialization in manufacturing or products, and as such, them now knowing, oh, we have